Gregory Morgan, and welcome to Love Talk. What I particularly want to talk about is the overwhelming majority of addictive relationships and how we are in a world in which addiction and addictive relationship is actually the norm. Really, Love Talk is about applying principles, not just any old principles, but the principles of transformation, the principles of sound spiritual practices. Now, this is not a religious show, but it is a show that reflects upon and honors that which is noble and great in the human spirit. What honors and dignifies humanity, that spiritual essence in us that is noble, that is clear, and that is called upon and informed by something higher, at a higher vibration than just our normal everyday frequency of living. I'll be referring to that too in my show today. What if is a hypnotic language. Anything that has the word would, could, or should, or the words if attached to the sentences are always applying to and referring to something other than right here, right now, reality. If you want to have power, if you want to have authority, and by authority, I'm using the word author. In other words, authority means to be the author of your reality, to be the author of your own life. In other words, this is your movie, you're writing the script, and it's going to go how you say it's going to go because you're the author of your life, that you have given yourself the authority. So many of us have grown up in a world where, of course, when you first get here, you're not the authority. They are, the adults, right? The big ones, the ones that talk and walk and feed you. They're the authority, and so it is only natural as an outcome of being raised as a child by adults to tend to give over authority, to surrender authority to all those others out there. There comes a time in your life when it is time to actually claim your own authority, claim the authorship of your life. And it's probably not when you're a child or an infant. I'm going to say that it's not, even though it is true that even at that stage you are the author of your own life. You're just not aware of it yet. You don't have the overall capacities of discernment to be able to manage your life in a physical world. So it's good to abdicate authority up into a certain point, and then we reach a point where we begin to become self-referential. We begin to have our own thoughts. We begin to have feelings that perhaps we don't understand, but there are feelings and they're real. We begin to have connections with something greater than ourselves, some kind of a spiritual insight that comes about in every person's life. I don't care who you are. It's happened to you at some point in your life where you've had some kind of a spiritual awakening or some kind of an inner thought that came to your mind, and perhaps you pondered it or were confused by it or even frightened by it and put it away and chose to either not think of it, or maybe you thought about it a lot, but you could never get back to that place. That is a time when you begin to awaken as an individual. You begin to awaken as a spirit or a soul in this world, and it begins to be time for you to begin answering some of your own questions. So it's about that time, and it's usually around the teenage years, of course, that we begin to have conflicts with authority. That is, our parents, the school, whatever system you happen to be in. And I can tell you pretty much from working with thousands of people that regardless of the system that you're raised in, whether you're raised in America or Iran or England or Canada or, I don't know, Brazil or wherever you're raised in, you're going to have a conflict with authority sometime in your teenage years. It's just normal because you've started to wake up and come into yourself. Now, in the normal evolution of things, by the time you were in your late teens, early 20s, you would have begun to be encouraged by the authorities, the adults, to think for yourself and begin to discover your own answers. That's usually not the case, though. We don't live in a society, and that's what I'm going to address today. What I'm dedicating, or what I'm using this showtime about today, is talking about addictive systems, which essentially is a system of non-living. It has a non-living orientation. Why don't I go ahead and end that discussion? In an addictive system, which is a non-living orientation, the more you are alive, more that you are sensual, sexual, playful, loud, joyous as a child, the more you are encouraged to keep it quiet, keep it down, hush up, don't do that, don't say that, don't think that, don't go with that. In other words, your aliveness is suppressed so as to fit in and began to operate inside of a system that is committed to, that is designed to kill off aliveness and keep you powerless and dependent upon others for the answers. So that is an addictive system, any system or process over which you are powerless, in which you as an individual remain powerless, and any substance over which you are powerless. So there's addiction falls into two sort of categories, if you will: substance abuse and process abuse. Substance abuse would be, anything like food, cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, anything that you ingest that is a substance which has a chemical reaction of some kind in your system in which you are powerless. In other words, even though you may see that it is not working out for you, that it's harmful to your health, that it's harmful to your mental state, that it's harmful to your financial state ultimately, you're harmful to your relationships, and generally harmful to life itself. Any substance that you see that is harmful and yet you are powerless to stop using it is an addiction. Okay, that's a good definition of a substance type addiction. A process addiction could be sex, gambling. The internet can be an addiction at this day and age, right? I kind of have an internet addiction. How many of you find yourself getting up and getting on the internet and staying on the internet, just cruising around, and you can't not do it? Or television, watching television. All of those types of processes that are a doingness that take away from your aliveness, that keep you from being fully self-expressed, from exploring and finding your own answers, and that eventually end up being harmful to your mental, physical, emotional, spiritual state, or financial state, or your relationships. I'm going to say those things are process addictions. And anything that becomes progressively more and more compulsive or obsessive. If you find yourself sort of, at first you were kind of interested in this, now you're very interested in this, now you feel compelled about this, and then now you are obsessed by it. Like, it could be food, like, when am I going to eat again, or what are we going to eat? I know people, it's like you wake up in the morning and they're already thinking about what they're going to have for dinner and for lunch, and they've gone to bed at night, like getting their breakfast ready. So, they're very oriented around food. They can be very healthy people. I used to be one of those people. I at one time in my life, I got off of my diet, if you will. I started eating whatever I wanted. I gained some weight. I didn't feel good about myself. So I said, well, to correct that, I'm going to hire a nutritionist. And I did. I studied everything I could learn about nutrition for about a year and a half. I got an encyclopedia of every substance known to man and studied that and learned about calories and everything like that. I hired a nutritionist, and she actually prepared 6 meals a day for me. I would go and drop off these containers and pick up more containers and eat only certain foods, and it became like an obsession. Like if I had to travel or go to the gym or do a seminar or workshop that interrupted that eating schedule, I would feel off kilter. So even though I was attempting to be healthy, I actually became sort of obsessed by food, like the right food, and when it's time for me to have my food. So it was like an obsession, and I began to, I was awake and aware enough to realize that, this healthy thing I was trying to do, now I'm obsessed with being healthy. I let go of that whole thing. I had learned enough about what's healthy to eat and what's healthy not to eat. So now I just eat healthy. I eat when I want to, I don't eat when I don't want to, and I eat whatever I want to. I live a balanced life naturally. In other words, I self-authorized myself. I authorized myself to know what was healthy because I had done the work. I had done the study, so I authorized myself to know what is healthy and to do the right thing. Again, this show's not about me. It's about addictions and about handling addictive systems and learning to recognize when you're in one. Even if you're in a healthy one that becomes obsessive or compulsive, then you're still in an addictive system, you see. Anything that takes over and causes us to think and do things that are inconsistent with our values. So if you have any kind of a process that you're going through, it could be a religion, it could be a philosophy, it could be a way of life. And even though you set out to do something for your good, if it becomes something that is taking over your thinking and causing you to do things that are inconsistent with your own personal values, then I'm going to call that an addiction. Most of the time, religion becomes an addiction because it is the nature of religious values to say our values are the right values and your values are the wrong values. So even though your values may not match up with the religious leaders or the religious thinkers' values, you abdicate or you surrender your own values in favor of an external source of values that are not your own. That is an addiction. Anytime you have given up your own values, your own beliefs, and you're questioning the authority that is coming from outside of you and telling you that these are the right values, this is the right way of thinking, doing, and being, then you have entered into an addictive system. Anytime you're masking your true feelings and your perceptions are confused, so you don't trust your own perception, you don't trust your own vision. In other words, you see or you have insights. Everybody has insights. You're having insights right now as I'm speaking. I'm designed this talk so that you would have insights just listening to it. So in listening to this, you're beginning to have self-thoughts. You're beginning to reflect and have a look at yourself and a look at some of your habits and ways of being and values, and that's a good thing. Anything that would ask you to mask your true feelings and confuse your perceptions, your own personal perceptions of things, is an addictive system. There's some characteristics of addictive thinking, and one of the characteristics is the one I just mentioned, is dishonesty. Addictive thinking is basically dishonest thinking. Another characteristic is self-centeredness. It's all about me. What's more important in the world is me, and then everybody else and everything else comes second. Another characteristic of addictive systems or addictive thinking is dependency, a feeling that I can't go on without you, or I couldn't face the world without it, without this. I don't want to even think about my life without this person or that thing or this process or that substance. In other words, dependency. You can't even begin to imagine if somebody said, okay, if you're not, and this happens, you know, if it's cigarettes, if it's, a lot of people say, well, I'm not really addicted to cigarettes, I just like to smoke. Or eating. I'm not really addicted to eating tons of food a day. Or I'm not really addicted to this person. The question is, could you stop doing that? Of course, you can't stop eating for 90 days, but could you stop overeating for 90 days? Could you stop smoking for 90 days? Could you stop drinking for 90 days? Okay, if you're not addicted to it, then it should be no problem for you to just say, okay, I'm not going to do that for 90 days. No problem. So if it's something that you feel dependent on, like, I don't know if I could get by without it, that's an addiction. Another characteristic of addictive thinking is the need for control. Ultimately, addictions are an attempt to try to control something. It's a feeling, it comes from a feeling of being out of control, and it's an attempt to control something. Food addictions, whether it's bulimia or anorexia or overeating, those are all attempts to control something, because we can at least control what goes into our mouth. So it's a resistance to being dominated or controlled, and so it's an attempt to control something. Same is true for the other addictions. They're all control-based. Another characteristic, if you will, of addictive systems is a total lack of inner awareness. You know, a lot of times people say, well, you know, I'll ask people, well, what does your gut feeling say? What is your, you know, look in your own heart and tell me what you think. You know, tell me what you see there. And a lot of times people go, nothing, I don't know, I don't have any feeling about it at all. In other words, the system has taken away your ability to be self-referential. Any kind of self-awareness has been muted, numbed out, killed off, turned off, masked. There's a veil in front of it, and you can't get at your own inner awareness. And so, of course, that will give you confused perceptions. You're not perceiving the world rightly when you're not seeing the world with your heart, with your feeling, as well as with your mind. Yes, we have eyes, we have ears, we have our external perceptions of the world, of course, and we see the world through our senses, but we also can see the world with our eyes closed, can we not? We can see the world, we can hear the world in total silence, can we not? There's a part of you that is responding to that question even now as I ask it, that's going, yes, I know, yes, I can. Yes, there is a part of you that needs no eyes or ears to see and feel the world. it perceives the world directly. Somewhere around here in the solar plexus, somewhere here in the heart and throat, we have a feeling about the world. We have a feeling about the people we meet, the things and events and circumstances in our life. We have a feeling and a sort of inner knowing, but that gets confused, it gets diluted, it gets masked. So we begin to rely on confused perceptions. And so internally we become dead. There's a kind of deadness. I'm going to talk about deadness, in a minute, but I want to first just finally say that eventually this type of lack of inner awareness and relying on confused feelings, confused perception, this inner deadness ultimately does lead to death, like real death, like the kind where they, say a funeral and you're gone, okay? Ultimately will lead to death. And all addictions, regardless of their nature, whether it's a substance addiction or a process addiction, all addictions eventually do lead to death. This inner deadness, this lack of inner awareness, this confused perception will ultimately lead to the demise of the spirit, the demise of the individual, and the demise of the human being. What if the whole world as you knew it, as you know it, was an addictive system? What if you and I were born into a system that, unbeknownst to itself, was designed to cause you and I to become codependent, to actually value things that were not of our own value system? In other words, we were confused about our own values because we'd never been able or compelled to look at what is your own personal values. So consequently, we were confused and our perceptions were confused about what our values were, and that everyone around you, like 96% of the population, was in a sort of walking dead system. In that kind of a system, there are choices. There are choices to be made. When you were a child, if you were happy and noisy and excited and full of energy and exuberant, or sexual, for God's sake, then you were a bad boy or a bad girl. You were encouraged to be quiet, depressed, withdrawn, certainly non-sexual, and ended up being amongst the non-living. So in that situation, in that environment, we basically had three choices for survival, and none of them had much to do with being happy, exuberant, alive, full of oneself, certain of oneself, clear in our perceptions, awake, and stimulated by life. Survival, I'm going to tell you what the three survival choices are that you and I have been given in the system that we were born into. It's a system of addiction. In that system, you could choose to not be alive and choose to die. In other words, you could literally suicide or kill yourself off, or you could just choose to not live, and you could choose to die. You could choose to not die, and you could choose to live. That would be your second choice, yes? Could choose to not die, and you could choose to live, like to fully live your life full out. But the third choice is what most people have made, and that is you choose not to die, but you also choose not to live. Choose not to die, like literally, physically, but you choose not to live fully either. So consequently, you have a world of people who are not fully alive. I call them the walking dead. They're not fully alive, they're not fully awake, they're not fully aware, they don't trust themselves in their own perceptions. They depend upon others for their source of aliveness and awareness. In other words, I'm kind of dead inside, but I'm going to count on you to bring me aliveness. The model for relationships, particularly in the world of romantic relationships, is you have two half persons depending on one another for having one whole life. And so we even have songs and movies and poems and everything about how you complete me. There is something that is a myth, as far as I'm concerned, called the soulmate that we're all looking for in order to complete ourselves and to be fulfilled in our life. Now, I'm not saying that there are not persons who spiritually are bond together and who belong together. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that you could bond spiritually, mentally, socially, emotionally, spiritually, financially, with another human being out of choice, not because there's some destination that has determined it in advance for you, and so now you must go find them, and if you don't, you won't be complete. That's just simply not true. You can choose to be whole and complete and alive and fulfilled in your life with no one else in your life, and then choose to bring that aliveness and that full awareness and that plenitude and that completeness to a relationship. You could choose to have a relationship with someone because you could afford to, because you have more than enough aliveness, time, and love and energy for yourself, and more than enough to share with someone else. What if your relationships were an expression of your aliveness rather than something that you depended upon or you counted upon to be whole and complete or fulfilled? Codependent relationships, codependencies, are an inheritance. Most people, and a codependent relationship is when you're in love with or in a relationship with somebody who themselves is an addict or addicted to a substance or a process, as we discussed earlier in the show. There's two kinds of addictions: substance addiction and process addiction. Somebody who is displaying addictive behavior and you're in love with them, you're in a relationship with them. And guess what? They're in a relationship with you, and you probably have your own addictions. Sometimes the addict is the addiction. In other words, they may be addicted to a substance or a process, and you're addicted to the addict, but nonetheless addicted, compelled, helpless without, dependent upon, codependent. Codependent relationships are the predominant relationships in our society, and they're born out of our religious beliefs, our social norms, and a certain amount of dishonesty, which we'll talk about in a minute. Usually, if you're in a codependent relationship, it's because you have parents or grandparents that have codependent relationship, or you grew up in an emotionally repressive environment. You have a feeling of powerlessness. Growing up in an emotionally suppressive environment, you would naturally feel powerless, and you would be surrounded by what I'm calling the non-living, and so naturally as a child and as a teenager and as a young adult and then later into an adulthood, you would become accustomed to a sort of numbness, a sort of deadness that is there. And you actually become addicted to that. In other words, when somebody that's really alive and happy shows up and really fully self-express, you feel like you either have to suppress them or get away from them or get them out of your space or something else. But it's threatening. We're threatened by aliveness. It's too happy, it's too noisy, it's too excited, it's too full of energy, it's too sexual. A good boy or a good girl, we've been taught by our codependent, numb environment, is quiet, is withdrawn, somewhat depressed, non-sexual, and perhaps even sick. In other words, some kind of an ailment, some kind of an injury or an ailment or some part of you that has begun to become identified with something that is sick. And by sick, I mean part of your identity becomes tied up with or bound up with, I'm broken and I need to be fixed. I'm not enough, so I need to work on myself and get better. I'm an incest survivor, or I'm a rape survivor, or I'm a child molestation survivor, or I had a bad childhood, my parents were abusive, Jewish, or I was Muslim, or I was Christian in a bad neighborhood. And we'll talk about this what if, this relationship to the past as if that it's who you are. So you begin to have an inauthentic relationship with reality in which you actually become addicted to this lack of inner awareness, the dishonesty, self-centeredness, dependency, codependency, and a need for control. So I talked about the survival choices, and the third survival choice is the choice that most people choose, is they choose not to die and they choose not to live. So you have this environment of the Walking Dead or the numb. Now there's three characteristics that typify this kind of thinking. They're called the three ifs. Now, earlier in the show, I had mentioned that whenever we're using language that includes the words if or would or should or could, one is always relating in that type of language, we're always relating to something that is not real as if it were more important than what actually is real. Now, you can have a pretty profound philosophical and quantum physics discussion on what's real and what's not, and we're not going to go into that today. But let's say for the sake of this conversation that it's real if you can see it, touch it, taste it, hear it, smell it, and it's here now. You know, you can have it, like I said, you could have a discussion with on a quantum physics level that, you know, this computer is actually just energy, it's a bunch of molecules, there's more space there than there is protons, neutrons, electrons, and atoms. You could have that discussion, and it would be quite an interesting discussion, however not very useful for you and me. Not very useful for us in our day-to-day life and in understanding with, coping with, and dealing with the here and now presence of our physical life. So for the sake of this conversation, let's say that what's real is what you can deal with right now, what is present right now. If I say this table isn't real and then I try to walk through it, I'm going to have a problem. So let's just say this table's real and I'll deal with it like it's really real and walk around it if I need to get over there on the other side of the room. Let's deal with what is real like what's present. Let's deal with what is real like the future is not present. It's not here. It's not now. I'm going to relate, for the sake of this conversation, to the future as if it is not real. And I'm going to relate to the past in the same way. Now, that's a little tougher for some people. A lot of people can go, okay, I can get it. The future's not real because I can't really actually be there yet. But the past, now that's real. I have photographs. I have documents. It's been proven that I was there and that that was real. Okay, well, what's your access to it right now here today? You don't have access to the past except through your memory, through your speaking, through, whatever, your photographs or whatever that remind you of the past. But the past is not present like something you could actually deal with or do something about. So there's three ifs that people tend to deal with when they're living in the world of the walking dead, in the world of the numb with confused perceptions. One of the confused perceptions is what I call the three ifs. And one of them is called if only. And that one, of course, is relating to the past. If only my father had been a doctor or been more wealthy. If only my parents hadn't been divorced. If only I had gone to a better school. If only my sister didn't marry that guy. If only. In the world of if only, it is avoiding the present by lying. Having an inauthentic relationship is what I call lying. Having an inauthentic relationship to the past. If only the past was not the way it was, the present would not be the way it is. That's the lie. Because you have no proof, you have no evidence, you have absolutely nothing to substantiate that claim. There is no evidence to substantiate that claim. You'll never be able to produce evidence to substantiate that claim in a rigorous examination, and in your gut, in your heart, you actually know this is true. If only is an attempt to justify the circumstances of the present by appointing the past as the cause. And it's an attempt to say the present is the way it is, and the cause or source of the present being the way it is something that I have no control over in the past. Somebody else, something else, something that even if I did have control over it then, in that present that is gone, called the past, even if I had done differently, there's no absolute evidence that things would be any different than they are right now today. The first if only of confused thinking, is an inauthentic relationship with the past, assigning the cause of the present, saying the present's the way it is, if only it had been different in the past. So that's the first one. The second if is as if. In other words, you're out of touch with the present. When somebody is out of touch with their present moment, who they authentically are right now, out of touch with how things really are, there is a tendency, a dishonest tendency, to appear to be something you're not, to be richer, taller, smarter, more educated, more perceptive, more sensitive, more kind than you actually really are. So it's sort of an inauthentic relationship to oneself first, and then to others as a result of that. So we have a relationship with people. Look in your own relationships, in our marriages, in our parents, with our classmates, with our employees or employers, with our religious leaders, with our political leaders, and them with us. There is a hidden or under the rug conversation, what is called a meta conversation, or a conversation that's in the background, that is unspoken and yet understood by us all. We never say this, but we all understand it, and we kind of wink, pretend that we don't know. And it's an attempt to pretend that the things are not the way they are, and that they are some way that they're not. So you may be feeling lousy, you may be just, no matter, whatever. How are things? You'll say, great. How are you feeling? Wonderful. Number one, right? You'll have some inauthentic thing. Or somebody will ask you to do something that you really don't want to do. That maybe you can't afford it, or maybe you don't have time for it, or maybe you just don't even like the person and you don't feel like doing it. But you'll say, sure, of course, no problem. Anytime. Gorbanitzbara. You'll say all of these inauthentic things to appear to be kind, kinder than you are, nicer than you are, more generous than you are. In other words, an inauthentic relationship to the present. Also, in those relationships where that you have, and I have, we all have, in which we are pretending to be something that we're not, and we're pretending not to know that somebody else is pretending to be something that they're not. In those relationships, if anybody actually tells the truth and says it like it really is, for the most part, the relationship will fall apart. Somebody really actually tells the truth about what they're really thinking and feeling, because the agreement is we will all act as if. We'll all act as if it's all cool. We'll all act as if we all love each other. We'll all act as if we're kinder than we really are. We'll all act if what that thing that those other people did that we never wanted to tolerate in our life and that hurt us deeply is just fine. So part of acting as if is to maintain at all costs the illusion that your current present reality is different than it is. Okay, so as if is the second if, and it is an avoidance of the present. An avoidance of the future is what if? What if? It's a dishonesty about the future, and it's an attempt to mask one's feelings about the present and one's inner knowing about the future. In other words, some part of you kind of already knows how this is going to turn out. Some part of you living this authentic life, the real part of you, the part of you that you never share, the one that's pretending and saying as if, that part of you, that inner knowing part of you that is gone numb, that has got confused perception, has a gut feeling, if you will, has a feeling about how this is going to turn out. There's something called the predictable, almost certain future. And take a look in your own life right now. Take a look at your relationship. Take a look at your finances. Take a look at some of those habits that you're pretending you don't have. Take a look at some of those deep hidden feelings that you pretend are not there. And take a look at your finances. Take a look at your education, your religion. Then look inside and notice that if I were to ask you to write down in a secret place that nobody could see but you, how this is going to turn out. How's those finances going to turn out for you in about 10 years, the way it's going now? How is that relationship going to turn out? You know, there's a predictable, almost certain future. It's kind of like you look down that road and you see where it's going. And you kind of know it's predictable and it's almost certain that it's going to go that way. There's some chance that something could come along and change it, but if you had to bet money on it, you're pretty sure of how this is going to turn out. Same with your businesses and your political systems. You know how it's going to turn out, but we play what if. What if it did turn out? What if? So it's a sort of pretending that helps us cope with and hide from ourselves in the as-if world, helps us hide from ourselves in the as-is world, the inner knowledge of how it's really going to turn out that we sort of already know. So what if is another dishonesty about the future. It's an attempt to mask your feelings about the present. And in a world like that, your world, my world, the world that you and I grew up with, the world of your parents and my parents and their parents, in that system, in that addictive system, it's naive to be honest. You see, dishonesty becomes the norm. In other words, we've all kind of agreed to be dishonest. We have this unspoken conversation, you know, I'll say it in a shorter way this time. I won't call you on your BS if you don't call me on mine. I won't call it on you if you don't call it on me. We'll both pretend, okay? So that's the unspoken, agreed upon reality. And so in that reality, dishonesty is the norm. It's just normal to be dishonest. In fact, you would be foolish to be honest in that reality, in that world, in that society, in that culture, in this world, this society, this culture. Only fools are honest about how they really feel. I mean, would you really tell that guy or that gal you're dating for the first time how you really feel about them? Would you really tell even your husband or wife how you really feel? Would you tell your boss how you really feel, what you really think? Would you tell the police? Would you tell the government what you really think and what you really feel? It's kind of foolish. It's kind of like you could get in trouble for that. Nobody is really saying what they really think, and that has become the norm. That has become how it is, that we all must learn to act as if. So in that form where dishonesty is the norm, niceness is just another form of dishonesty. To be nice, to be kind, to be considerate, to be polite. It's in other words, taught off, is another form of dishonesty. It is a dishonest system designed to maintain the norm. And what's the norm? The norm is, I won't call you on yours and tell you the truth about how I feel, or what I think, or what I see, or what I think is going to turn out. I'll just keep that numb and to myself, and I'll be nice. And we'll pretend that we're all in agreement about that. And so dishonesty has become systemized. Dishonesty now is what we assume is normal. We don't believe what we hear. Ultimately, we don't believe what we hear because we don't even believe what we say. And in a world where a person's word of honor is useless, in a world where dishonesty is normal, a person's word of honor is useless. It has no meaning. And when honor ceases to exist, when there is no longer a sense of honor, personal integrity, personal mastery, then self-centered and acting as if will rule the world. And that's what we have today. All right, well, I hope this show has made a difference for you. I hope that you've learned something today. I will see you back here again next week on Love Talk.
برنده بودن هنری است که یادگیری آن تمامی زندگی ما را تحت الشعاع قرار می‌دهد و زندگی عادی را به خارق‌العاده تبدیل می‌کند. صرفاً رسیدن به اهداف و خواسته ها منجر به شادی و رضایت نمی شود. برندگان زندگانی می کنند. هنر برنده بودن. سمیناری فارسی توسط خانم دکتر آزیتا سایان، 4 مارس ساعت 7:30 عصر در وارنر سنتر مریت وودلند هیلز. بلیط های خود را همین الان از وبسایت و یا اپلیکیشن Embrace Growth تهیه بفرمایید و یا با شماره 310 460 2600 تماس بگیرید. اپلیکیشن Embrace Growth. با ساختن اکانت شخصی شما می توانید وارد پروفایل خود شده و تنظیمات آن را تغییر دهید. به تمامی رویدادها و محصولات دسترسی داشته باشید. با چند کلیک برای سمینارها و کارگاه‌ها ثبت نام کنید و یا وقت مشاوره خود را رزرو نمایید. اپلیکیشن Embrace Growth را امروز از اپ استور دانلود کنید و به خانواده جهانی Embrace Growth بپیوندید. یک مرد منحصر به فرد، مسلط، متمرکز، قابل اعتماد و رضایتمند باشید. کارگاه شرافت، عزت کلام و مهارت به رهبری دکتر آزیتا سایان. لس آنجلس 13 تا 15 مارچ، تورنتو 16 تا 18 اکتبر و ایروان ارمنستان 5 تا 7 نوامبر. برای اطلاعات بیشتر با شماره 310 460 2600 تماس بگیرید. در کارگاه‌های آموزشی بانوان به رهبری دکتر آزیتا سایان خود واقعیتان و همچنین مردان را بشناسید و با استفاده از قدرت زنانه خود روابطی سالم و عاشقانه بسازید. همبورگ 28 فوریه تا اول مارچ، لس آنجلس 17 تا 19 آپریل، تورنتو 26 تا 28 جون و ایروان ارمنستان 6 تا 8 آگوست برگزار خواهد شد. 310 460 2600 embracegrowth.com